Okay, hi. I'm Lucas Miller, and this is my final project, Tiny Travelers. To explain the game, it's a four-player game. It's good for the whole family. Its runtime is about 30 minutes, and it's an adventure inside the living room. So to begin the setup, you need to set up the board, put the googly eyes on the inside spaces, create basic character sheets, which we'll go over in a minute when we go over the combat system. You'd need to set up the combat blocks for the combat system, which is the mechanic I talked to you about, Professor. And then you'd need to set up the loot cards and the boss cards, as well as your travelers. You'd put a clothespin on the bottom so that they would stay standing, and you'd place whomever on start. Players would roll the dice, and they would go in order of highest roll down to lowest roll. So the way the game would begin is players would choose either Hannah the Halfling, Eric the Elf, Sabrina the Sorceress, or Tim the Troll, and then go through the process that I had explained earlier. Then they would roll the die, and it's a six-sided die, and they would go however many spaces. To explain the spaces, level up has to do with the combat system. It permanently increases the player's health by 2 hit points and heals them for 2 hit points. The loot space allows a player to grab a gear card which has damage modifiers on them and also affect combat. I'll go through those in a minute when I get to the combat system. Going on, there is the insight space. Insight allows the player to move the googly eye over to their player sheet, and then it's a one-use power that allows the player to roll the dice twice and pick whichever roll they would rather prefer. And then you have the potion slot, which allows them to gain another potion. These heal for 10 hit points in the combat system, which I'll get to later, and players can have a maximum of 3. The turn back space applies to everyone before they get to the boss. If you don't believe that your player is strong enough yet, you can turn back and go all the way back to the first space after the last boss, and then you can go through the whole process again, leveling up and quote-unquote grinding. The reason that's probably a bad thing, and the reason you wouldn't want to do it, is because there are 3 ways to win the game. 2 of them are through the combat system, which I'll go through later, and the third is just to be the furthest around the board to have beaten the most bosses and gone the most spaces before 30 minutes is up, if the time limit expires. So now heading forward to the combat system. Let's say Tim the Troll was down here fighting the first boss. Players would flip over the first boss card and learn that George the Glob has 10 health and does 2 damage per attack. Then we would look at Tim's character sheet. The first thing that we would realize is that Tim only has 10 health and 1 potion. He also has 3 equipable slots. The slots are his armor slot, which he might have equipped, his weapon slot, which he may have equipped, and his shield slot, which he may have equipped. But in this case, there are also two-handed weapons. Two-handed weapons prevent you from equipping a shield and a one-handed weapon and just allow you to use a more powerful weapon for both slots. So, to start off the combat system, players most likely wouldn't have a weapon in the first fight. George the Glob has 10 health, and so does the player. The player would then remove some of the combat blocks, testing the tower and seeing which block they could pull, and then they would read off the damage. In this case, Tim the Troll did 3 damage on his first attack. So they would also track their boss's health on the player sheet. 10 minus 3 is 7, and since it's turn-based combat, George the Glob would do 2 damage per attack, which would come off of Tim the Troll's 10 health, and Tim the Troll would have 8 health going into the second round of combat and the second turn. Had he had a weapon equipped, he would have done the 3 plus 2 damage. So he would have done 5 to George the Glob, and that's how the weapon system works. There are 3 different ways to win the game. The first I've already discussed is to be the furthest around the board when time expires. The second is to defeat Evil Wizard Wyatt, the ultimate boss of the game, who has the most health and deals the most damage to players, or to have every other player die. Players die by having their health reduced to 0 before they reduce the bosses, and they are eliminated from the game. Or they can also be eliminated during combat by pulling one of the bricks that knocks over the combat tower. After the combat tower is knocked over, that player is eliminated, the tower is reset to the starting condition of the game, and players continue. I thought this was a really interesting mechanic because it took players out of the game situationally. After 3 players fight a boss, the tower will usually fall. So it not only creates a race against time to be the first player to beat each boss, but then to also be patient enough to grind in between those to know when the tower is going to fall and when you're strong enough to beat the next boss. I also thought this created great interplayer connections because strategically, if I pull the blocks that you think that, if I pull the last block that won't knock over the tower and you have to, then strategically I've eliminated you from the game. And so that's kind of why I didn't include player versus player combat. But I think that the combat blocks, the combat system, and the weaponry make this for a fun and interesting game. Thank you. Have a great day.